Hello, I'm Tom Bell. You're watching a special edition of Head to Head on UATV. We're in Mariupol at the Rethink Invest in Ukraine conference. And joining me now is Daniel Bilak. He is the chairman of the Supervisory Board of UkraineInvest. Hi Daniel, thanks very much for joining us. So one of the ideas of the forum is to promote and support investments in Ukraine. And I know that you work across a broad range of areas. So what are your strategies currently to entice these investors, and how do you promote the country's brand abroad?
Well, you know, it's been a very interesting process. I mean, one of the things we found when we started 3 years ago was that it wasn't just that people may have had a bad impression about Ukraine. Many investors in many countries had no impression about Ukraine. They had no idea what the country was about, where it was, you know, who these people are. I mean, it was at least in most people's consciousness, it was now not Russia. And it was actually a European country, so that was a big plus. But we had to really come up with a new narrative, and when you're really got into what essentially has become country branding. And I needed to find, instead of talking about all the different areas, that we had a 1+4 sector strategy that we would promote. There was infrastructure, agribusiness, manufacturing, energy, all of which was informed by innovation technology. And as we started to move more and more promoting this stuff, we saw that we would get further faster with finding this point of relevancy that was really important. Because when you're trying to brand a country, if you're just overwhelming somebody with information, they just tune out, and it just, it just comes out kasha, as they say. But we started focusing on innovation technology, not just IT, but innovation as a whole, because there's so much more going on here in AI, NLP. I mean, machine learning. We started to talk about the fact that the Mercedes-Benz infotainment system is developed in Ukraine. Ring, the doorbell app on your iPhone, was developed here. And what we found was that even though investors and people outside of Ukraine may not know a lot about Ukraine, everybody identified with Ukrainian engineers. They're the most creative, they're the best, they get the results done, they're absolutely top drawer. And so we started really focusing and promoting this. And I think this forum is important, sort of switching gears a bit, but we're still relevant. This forum is important because it's also introducing investors who are already in this country to Eastern Ukraine. We have this great divide along the Dnipro River in terms of foreign investment. You have the high concentration, for obvious reasons, high concentration in Lviv, Ivano-Frankivsk, all the way to Vinnytsia, Kyiv, and then you hit the Dnipro, and then it starts to trickle over on the other side. You have some big investors on this side of the Dnipro, but it's getting more of that awareness, and especially removing the fear factor.
Why is that? Is it just the fear factor? I mean, you mentioned Kyiv and Lviv, and more generally the western and central parts of Ukraine, while the Donetsk and Luhansk regions really lag behind.
Yeah, but I mean, that's just simple geography. I mean, you're logistically. I mean, we're integrating into Europe at all levels, into European Union rather, in all levels. I mean, recognition that we are a European country. We now have the DCFTA, the Deeply Comprehensive Free Trade Agreement, the EU-Ukraine Association Agreement. This is the constitution of the Ukrainian economy. And we've actually moved further faster than any of the parties that were signatories to these agreements expected. So there's always been more of an entrepreneurial spirit on the right bank of the country, whereas on the left bank it's been more of this is where the heavy industry was. This is where more patriarchal, hierarchical. Socioeconomic system was. This is why the oligarchs were able to, they were able to gather the wealth, the concentration of assets, the concentration of people, and people are used to being told what to do, etc. And so that's breaking up slowly. The market is breaking up these monopolies. But Mariupol was actually a pretty progressive place. It wasn't really Donetsk.
It is different in a way.
It's very different from the rest of Donetsk. I mean, it has more in common with Berdyansk in Zaporizhia. These are coastal communities. The fact that it's on the water, the fact that it had a big port. I mean, obviously, UkraineInvest has a big plant here, a metals plant. So they had a big influence on the city, which has proven to be a kind of a double-edged sword because there being a lot of complaints about the pollution and everything else. So, and then of course the invasion of the Donbass and the fact that they were stopped 10 kilometers from Mariupol really put, Mariupolites had to define who they were and which side where they identified, and they ended up identifying very, very clearly and concisely with Ukraine.
With the ports and with other industry. I mean, when you speak to investors, what are the most common concerns or the most common queries that they have? Is it more to do with legislation or perhaps the economic situation?
I think that there's a general lack of recognition, coupled with a historical narrative based on fact of problems with the rule of law, corporate rating, a lot of nonsense that went on before 5 years ago. A lot of that has changed. There's always the corruption narrative. I mean, we have to remember the Russians spend billions of dollars promoting this narrative. It goes into this echo chamber. And, you have lazy journalists who, rather than check their facts and come and take a look, they just pick it up. Nobody ever got criticized for writing a bad article about Ukraine or an article about how bad Ukraine is. They would be taken on for writing something good, and so that then seems to get self-censorship and things like that. Look, I mean, I can complain about journalists all I want, but a lot of them have done a very good job. And actually, ironically, the situation in the United States right now seems to be actually playing to Ukraine's benefit. First of all, we get lots of recognition. Secondly, we're not the bad guy in this. In fact, the president and his group come out looking, relatively good because they said, "Look, we're not going to play this game." And you say things that in a private conversation that you wouldn't say publicly. But I mean, if you were to publicize conversation of other European leaders with the president of the United States, I think there'd be some embarrassing moments as well. But leaving that aside, I think that this general understanding about Mariupol helps inform a general impression about Ukraine as a whole. And for Ukrainians. It's not just for the foreign investors.
Because they've seen it that way before?
Well, a lot of people who live in the West, in central Ukraine, have never been to the Donbass, and vice versa. I mean, when I was the advisor to the governor of the Donbass in 2014, Serhiy Taruta, and I think less than 8% of the population had ever been outside the region. Only 2%, even though there's a thing about, they're all pro-Russian, only 2% had ever been to Russia. I mean, it was, or 12%. 12% had been to Russia, 2% had been abroad, like beyond the borders of Ukraine. So, I mean, it was a very insular, very heavy industry, mining, coal, iron ore production. I mean, these were company towns, and this Mariupol was no exception. And then what has happened post-Maidan has been that there's been an enormous amount, especially it started in the previous Poroshenko regime, and it's really picked up with President Zelensky, is the attention from the international community about developing Kherson, Mariupol, for their own sakes, but also as an example to the people in the occupied territories and in Crimea. What they've done brilliant things in Kherson. Jankoy is, people from Crimea come pick up their pensions. They cross the administrative line of control. And there's a brand new, spanking, modern administrative center where smiling young people in nice little kerchiefs and uniforms greet you, and they take your passport, they help you have a coffee, would you like some tea? I mean, people are just shell-shocked when then they go back to Crimea where they're treated like goats. And so it's really this is important because this is the granular level at which you change perceptions. One person, another. This is, Babusia comes here, she gets her passport, picks up her pension, she goes back home, and she tells her grandson, "You're not going to believe what happens." They have nice buses that pick people up at the point, and they drive them to the Kherson airport.
Do you think it's the same with foreign investors? We talked about branding Ukraine. How difficult is it to take this to the international arena?
The business absolutely has a herd mentality, but it's not rocket science at the end of the day. When I was appointed 3 years ago, I gave a presentation to the cabinet, and I said to them there that, look, we will only succeed, all of us together, if you, your ministries, and the agencies under you, all the way to the local level, treat investors as they would guests in their own home. It's really simple. You don't charge a guest to use a fork. You don't charge him for a glass of water. You don't charge him or her to go to the toilet. I mean, it's very simple. You go out of your way and make somebody feel welcome, and then they feel like they're at home. They feel like they're in their European country. Well, it's about service. It's about. I keep my line has always been, Ukraine is not the bride. There's not a lineup of princes waiting to marry the princess. We have to go out and say, look, here we are. This is what we stand for. This is our values. We have the same values as you do. In fact, it's a very strong argument that Ukraine is arguably the country in Europe that has most demonstrated its commitment to European values. I mean, we're the only country where people have died on the streets of their capital city for those values. Instead of burning the European flag, which seems to be increasingly popular in European countries, I mean, ours have bullet holes in them.
Also, after the 2014 revolution, there were a lot of painful reforms that took place, including in the energy sector, for example.
Well, the public procurement, the energy sector, automated VAT returns. People say that not enough is being done about corruption. Not enough is being done about corruption. True, I have my own list of people I would have liked to have seen put in prison. But when you look at what is being done on the institutional level, where you look at how you fight corruption by shining light in dark corners. So you look at the transparency initiatives, the ones we've just described now. These have saved between $6 to $8 billion a year since 2015 to the state budget, just in terms of the transparency initiatives on its own. And this government is now going to, rocket ship that into turbocharge, as they say, these reforms, because they realize that this government and a smartphone, aside from being convenient, it's a huge anti-corruption measure.
I think about Estonia when you say that. Everything's done through a smartphone, a tablet, or a computer.
Estonia is the size of Kiev, and it's much easier to do this. Obviously, you need political will. I take nothing away from the Estonians. They're absolutely one of our role models. But I mean, the scale on which you have to do this here, and the diversity that you have to account for, regional, ethnic, linguistic, is something that most other countries don't have to deal with. Having said that, everybody wants to have convenient services, right? So it's not rocket science at the end of the day.
So how has your work changed over the past 3 years, and how has the awareness of Ukraine changed?
Well, I told the Prime Minister when I was appointed that I was not going to be doing roadshows until I had actually something to say. And we would not have anything to say to new investors until we made existing investors happy campers. As a lawyer representing clients in Ukraine, I knew there were lots of issues, systemic issues, not just the problems of my particular client, but across the board. Tax, customs, land allocation, land permitting, it was a whole host. And, the previous government worked very, very hard. We got rid of 600 on deregulation. We got rid of 600 regulations amounting to almost 5,000 pages of documents, many dating back to, the 1940s in Soviet times. So those things in the hands of a bureaucrat is just gold mine, especially at the local level. We saw the the transformation of the gas sector, the electricity sector, 180-degree change in the electricity system. We're now third energy package compliant based on the European Energy Community Secretariat's advice. I mean, we're one of the leading examples in Europe of how an energy electricity system is supposed to be run. And, you know, we saw profound changes in the judiciary. You know, it's been popular to say, well, there's a perception that judiciary hasn't changed. Well, the perceptions are hard to beat. But the new Supreme Court that began its work in January of 2018 worked for a year and a half without a single scandal, without a single question about the people may not have been happy with the decisions, but they couldn't say that they weren't well argued, that they weren't properly adjudicated, or that they were corrupt. And the Supreme Court heard 230,000 cases in the last year and a half because there are no filters. So before you get rid of the Supreme Court, you should be focusing on fixing the lower court. So I mean, there are a lot of these things that have taken place that really form a firm foundation. You know, the medical system was overhauled. We began the overhaul of the educational system. I mean, all of which is being continued, and this is the way to do things. So a new government comes in. Yeah, okay. The people didn't like many things about the old government. That's fine, but it doesn't mean everything that was done was bad and of no value. There were a lot of things that were done very, very well.
So how exactly do you promote the Investment Promotion Office?
Well, we put out a weekly bulletin, but I mean, you know, just to finish on the reforms, we in the second quarter of this year, we have 4.6% economic growth. People said, "Wow, my goodness, where did that happen from?" Well, there you go. That's the result. There's a lag, but it catches up. And you know, we promote all of this through events that we do. Ukraine House is one of our key events, multi-stakeholder platform where we try to showcase the new Ukraine together with not just the government, us as the government, but also with private sector, the civil society groups, business, and we try to basically get that point of relevancy where people. At the end of the day, what I want an investor who listens to me or my staff say or think is that, holy smokes, I didn't know that. Maybe I should get an analyst looking at this a little closer. I want to know more about this country. That's a success. A stunning success is when that investor says, you know what, I'm going to get a delegation together and we're going to come. And they come to you again. Once they come here, we got them. Because the bar is so low. Their expectations are so tamped down that when they come, they go to Kyiv, they go to Odessa, they go to Lviv, even the Dnipro, Kharkiv, they just go, oh my gosh, who are these people? This is fantastic. And then, you know, you hit a tipping point after a certain period of time. So the key is to build momentum, to continue doing the right things, to continue building investor confidence and trust. This is the secret sauce. You know, it's, as I say, it's not rocket science.
Perfect. That's a great note to end it on. Thank you very much, Daniel, for joining us today. That was Daniel Bilak. He is the chairman of the Supervisory Board of UkraineInvest. You're watching UATV.